Hey guys, Miss Sailor here. So we're going to be talking about the Jackson administration. So while Jackson is president. So when the 1828 election had returned, Jackson had won handedly. He'd won every state west and south of Pennsylvania. Now he's prepared to enter the White House and he's determined to be the people's president. Now, there are widespread fraud that are revealed in the Treasury Department. So Jackson actually removes about 50% of the appointed civil officers, which allowed him to handpick their replacements. Now, this replacement of appointed federal officials is called a rotation in his office. So the people he is replacing them with are people that were party loyalists. So this is the spoils system. They're rewarding party loyalists with government jobs. So there's a lot of instances of corruption. Now, adding to this rancor of rotation in office, the Jackson administration also becomes involved in a personal scandal known as the Petticoat Affair. This incident exacerbated the division between the president's team and the insider class in the nation's capital because they found the Tennessean lacked decorum and propriety. So at the center of the storm is a Margaret, who is a well-known socialite in Washington, D.C., and she was married to John Timberlake, who was a naval officer, and they had 3 children. There were rumors that she was involved in an affair with John Eaton, who was a U.S. Senator from Tennessee, who was friends with Jackson. Timberlake, when he hears about these rumors, actually commits suicide in 1828, and it sets off a lot of more rumors. Now, Eaton and Miss Timberlake marry soon after with full approval of President Jackson, so this divides Washington's society. They're snubbing the new Mrs. Eaton as a woman of low moral character since she married literally right after her husband died. It causes John C. Calhoun, who was Jackson's vice president, to actually fall out of favor with Jackson because he did not care for them after this. Now, we are also still dealing with the Tariff of 1828, also referred to as the Tariff of Abominations. It had continued into the 1830s, and it highlighted one of the current the issues of the age of Jackson. Southerners believed a Democratic majority would be harmful to their interests. So the Southerners saw themselves as an embattled minority, and they're trying to claim the rights of states to nullify federal laws. So, the Tariff of 1828, it really looked like government overreach. There was a lot of resentment. See, it was tied directly to them, at least, the Southerners, to the issue of slavery, because the tariff demonstrated the use of federal power. Southerners feared that the federal government's next step against the South would include the abolition of slavery. So this is why they have what emerges as the Nullification Crisis. So the theory of nullification is the voiding of unwelcomed federal laws. They're trying to argue for the resistance of the national government if it acted in contrary to their interest. So nullification raises that specter of secession early on. This is in the 1830s. We're already discussing secession. That is the split of the Union. So aggrieved states at the mercy of an aggressive majority might be forced to leave the Union. So they're already discussing this. Now, on the issues of nullification, South Carolina stood alone. Other states backed away from what they saw was an extremism behind the idea. John C. Calhoun is the one that's pushing this idea. He is from South Carolina. Jackson, though, he does not make a repeal of the Tariff of 1828 a priority. He actually denied the nullifier's arguments. Jackson himself argued that the Constitution gave Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and exercises. So Jackson pledges to protect the Union against those who would try and tear it apart, especially over a tariff issue. So to deal with the crisis, Jackson advocates a reduction in tariff rates. So you have the Tariff of 1832, passed in the summer. It lowers the rates on some products like imported goods. However, it does not have the desired effect. In November, South Carolina passes the Ordinance of Nullification, which declares the 1828 and 1832 tariffs as null and void, at least within the state of South Carolina. Jackson responds, however, by declaring in December of 1832 the Nullification Proclamation, stating that states did not have the power to void federal law. So, with the state and the federal government at an impasse, civil war seems like a real possibility. Now, what ends up happening to soothe the feathers and diffuse the situation is you have the Compromise Tariff of 1833. It reduced tariff rates considerably. Nullifiers in South Carolina accepted it. The move, though, it demonstrates their inflexibility. They accept it, but they don't like it. Now, Congress also were dealing with Jackson and the bank wars. So, Congress had established the first Bank of the United States in 1791. It had expired in 1811. They had not renewed it. They do eventually have the Second Bank of the United States in 1816. It is chartered to expire in 1836. So the Second Bank of the United States was created to stabilize the banking system. Now, Jackson's opponents in Congress, Henry Clay, hoped to use their support of the bank to their advantage in the re-election campaign in 1832 when Jackson is running. They actually push in January of 1832 for the legislation that would go ahead and recharter it, even though it was not scheduled to expire until 1836. Now, the bill is passed in Congress and it goes to President Jackson, who then uses his executive authority to veto the measure. Now, the defeat of the Second Bank of the United States demonstrates Jackson's ability to focus on a specific issue. He understood people's distrust towards the bank. It stands as an emblem of special privilege and big government. So he uses that perception to his advantage, presenting the bank issue as a struggle of ordinary people against an elite class who cared nothing for the public and pursued their own selfish ends. So it is Jackson against the monster bank. Now he also makes a move in 1833 to remove deposits from the National Bank and place them in state banks. Now the bank's director, the National Bank's director, retaliates. He restricts loans to state banks, and then you have a reduction on the money supply. So there's a financial turmoil that is increasing, and Jackson issues an executive order known as the Secular. Okay, this required Western land sales to be conducted using only gold and silver. Fortunately, there is a shortage of hard money, and so American debtors are draining the gold and silver from their own domestic banks, so hard currency is scarce. Adding to the economic distress of the late 1830s, cotton prices are still plummeting. So we have the cotton prices plummeting as well as a lack of hard currency. It eventually leads to the financial crisis called the Panic of 1837. Now, this also leads in 1834 to the creation of the Whig Party. The name is significant. They are opponents of Jackson who see him as exercising tyrannical power. So they choose the name the Whig after the 18th century political party that resisted the monarchical power of King George III. So Whigs championed an active federal government committed to internal improvements, including a national bank. They made their first national appearance in the presidential election of 1836, a contest that pitted Jackson's hand-picked successor, Martin Van Buren, against a field of several Whig candidates. So we have this emergence. Now, pro-Jackson newspapers touted the president as a champion of opening lands for white settlement and moving native inhabitants beyond the boundaries of American civilization. So in this effort, Jackson reflected majority opinion. Most Americans believed Indians had no place in the white republic. Now, his animosity towards Native Americans ran very deep. So the 1830 Indian Removal Act and subsequent displacement of the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Cherokee tribes of the Southeast fulfilled the vision of a white nation and became one of the identifying characteristics of the age of Jackson. So, these 5 tribes, also referred to as the 5 civilized tribes, were located in Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. They were referred to as the civilized tribes because they, ironically, were more accepting of their Anglo-American culture counterparts. They spoke English and mostly practiced Christianity. So the act called for the removal of them from their home to the land in the West in present-day Oklahoma. So Jackson declared it in December of 1830. Now the Cherokee decided to fight the federal law, and they take their case to the Supreme Court in a legal battle, the Cherokee Nation versus the state of Georgia. They argue that they constituted an independent foreign nation and that this injunction should be placed on Georgia law as it should not count towards them. However, in 1831, the Supreme Court found the Cherokee did not meet the criteria for a foreign nation. Now, there is another case involving the Cherokee that is Worcestershire versus Georgia. All right, it asserted the rights of non-natives to live on Indian lands. So Samuel Worcester, he's a Christian missionary and a federal postmaster who lived among the Cherokee in Georgia. By living among the Cherokee, he violated Georgia law that forbid whites, unless they were agents of the federal government, to live in Indian territory. So they arrested him. But because he is a postmaster for the federal government, he is released. So Jackson's supporters had him fired, and then he was re-arrested. Now, he takes this to court, and it ends up in the Supreme Court in 1832, where Chief Justice John Marshall actually rules in favor of him, finding that the Cherokee constituted distinct political communities and that they were sovereign in their own right. Now, the Supreme Court did not have the power to enforce this ruling, though, so unfortunately, it became clear the Cherokee would be compelled to move. So those that understood the only option was removal traveled west, but the majority tried to stay. So in order to be removed, the president relied on the U.S. military. In a series of forced marches, some 15,000 Cherokee were relocated to Oklahoma. The forced migration is known as the Trail of Tears, and it caused the death of as many as 4,000 Cherokee. So, the removal of the 5 tribes provided an example of a power of majority opinion in a democracy.